Hello and welcome to Exile. Today we're going to talk about the Crucible basics, give you a rough outline of how this mechanic works and what are the best use cases for it. Now, the first use case and the main use case is base hunting. Pretty much what this implies is as you go through the map, whenever you find a Crucible thing, you just chuck a base in there and see what tree you get. This is valuable for a few reasons. One, you could get a valuable currency drop, like 3 divines as a sell price. It's very rare, something that probably happens once in 1,000 maps, but it's possible, and you need to factor that in as value. Second is you could get a outcome where it says sell for unique of the same base type. This is important if you have something like a champion kite shield, for example. If it hit that mod, you could sell it and you could guarantee get an Aegis. The other thing to note is if you get one of these valuable sell prices, you can use a beast split method to get twice the value. So if you hit 3 divines, you can get 6 divines and so on and so forth. So there's random value in terms of just selling the item if you hit a certain mod. Also, more valuable, I would think, on average, is just the rolls you get on these bases. The reason I have a Thicket base here is I think it's probably one of the best bow bases in the game, either Thicket or Spine, depending on what you're trying to build for, but I usually think Thicket is better in most general cases, especially for the fact that Bow League's pretty popular this league. If you hit things like attack speed, like explicit elemental modifiers, these are valuable modifiers that people are going to want on their bow, and they might just buy your base to craft their own bow with it. So, for example, if you're just base hunting, you could have something like, I don't know, 50C, 100C cell tab, throw bases in there every time you put on a Crucible tree if you don't want to look and try to figure out what trees are, and then keep track of what's selling and start to be like identifying, hey, this thing seems valuable, why is it selling, maybe I should price this higher next time I get a base with this mod. So base hunting's number one. Number two is simply crafting your own gear. For my build, I chose to craft a wand that had cast speed and +2. This is good for a multi-link wand, and so I'm going to showcase, if I was trying to make this wand again, right now I just threw on some random tree, I want to get an item that has +2 and cast speed, and I'm going to try to craft over those mods onto my base that has my links of supported by spell echo and more spell damage. If I'm trying to make a wand for this build here, this is the way I would do it. I'm gonna walk you through that. And then the next, and probably the most expensive, like the high-end version of crafting with Crucible, is when you're trying to make a base that's very valuable or very, very strong. For example, Steel Kite Shield is the base that becomes Emperor's Vigilance. That unique specifically gets a little bit outrageous with this mechanic because it has 1,000% increased armor and energy shield as a modifier. So if you get something that says plus flat ES on it, this would represent 340 flat ES if you had that on a Steel Kite Shield. That's why SST is going to be a very popular and very strong build this league, because if you get the right combination of modifiers, say I had this 34 ES and then I had explicit defense modifiers, well, I'd be looking at like an 800 ES as Emperor's Vigilance. If I by chance happen to upgrade this mod, there's a tier higher that rolls 40 flat, it would be 900 plus ES. So you kind of can see what I'm talking about here. It gets a little bit crazy. Now, specifically, when you're trying to combine these, you use geodes. Now, the most common is igneous geodes. These drop whenever you do a Crucible encounter at a pretty regular basis. I've been running Crucible for, I don't know, I want to say the past 200 maps or 150 maps, and I've dropped an igneous geode like 1 out of every 3 maps, 1 out of every 5 maps, something like that, just full charging, and these are pretty common. What isn't as common is crystallized geodes. These drop from the unique mobs very rarely, but I have dropped one, and both of these can also be sell outcomes. So say I charge up a bow, I can get a crystallized geode as a sell option if you charge it up a little bit more, and then sell it for the crystallized geode to get that as values per se. Now, what are the key differences between these? Well, you can crack these open with a right click, and these are what you get as outcomes. You either get a Primeval Remnant or a Primordial Remnant. The main difference here is Primordial Remnant can be used to combine uniques together. I think this is a largely weak use case because you can't reroll uniques. For whatever reason, GGG didn't think uniques should be able to have their Crucible tree rerolled. So ultimately, I think the top implicit of this thing is only going to be used by the very rich people. But more importantly, more generically useful for people is the mod that roll on the map themselves. Primordial Remnants can roll mods like, if you look at the top line here, Crucible passive on forged items have a 10% chance to be upgraded. So my theory is here, I'm going to try to combine these two items here in a hopes I upgrade this 34 flat ES to the 40 flat ES. That would be the best in slot mod for a Steel Kite Shield. The RNG of it happening, it's not likely, right? It says 10% chance to be upgraded. It's not a likely outcome. Maybe I hit it, maybe I get really lucky. Most likely I won't. There are other mods that say something like passives are more likely to be retained. Basically what I'm saying is Primordial Remnant has a little bit better rolls that might affect your ability to forge more reliably and get a better outcome more consistently. It's not guaranteed. It's not like a money printer like people might have said on Reddit. It is largely a gamble. A lot of these crafts are maybe like 40-60 in your favor if you have your node spec'd out. It isn't 100% chance you succeed. Stuff like that is getting very, very lucky. Okay, so to walk you guys through this, first of all, I'll open up a Crucible on the map and I'll throw on a tree with this. Thing about base hunting is I would generally suggest you want bases that are 84 or higher. The higher level the base, the more likely the base is to roll with up to 5 modifiers, up to 5 tiers. Then you have the tier 1 mod, the tier 2 mod, tier 3, tier 4. And if you're rolling a high level base, you're more likely to get branches all the way out here. If it's a low level base, you're going to get 3 branches or 2 branches. It's going to be a lot weaker. So I'd recommend 84 plus bases, generally just bases you would drop in T16 maps. All right, so first off, we'll do the Thicket Bow. Now that we're at the Crucible, if you're base hunting, I would just chuck this Thicket Bow in here and I'd start charging. But I also want to show you guys the craft of this wand here, and part of this craft is you want to unspec this node just to make it more likely you get the +2 socketed spells as the outcome from the combine. It's not guaranteed, but it does increase your odds. So what I would do is I'd pull this open while at the Crucible tree, and I can use a Scour Orb, right click here to remove that mod. This also works if you have like a brick mod, like cannot inflict ailments, and your build is an ailment build, and you've bricked your weapon, and you think your build's dead. Just get a Scour Orb and unspec the node if you need to. All right, now first up, base hunting. Pretty much all you do, you full charge. If your build isn't strong enough to full charge, I'd recommend doing half charge. The monsters are like 1/10 of the difficulty if you only half charge versus full charge. And pretty much what you want to do is I usually get away from the center, because the center you'll be in between all of them, and I shoot inwards just so I don't get completely just stomped by all the monsters hitting me at once. So once I kill the full charge mobs, you'll see there was that bright orange flash animation. That's when you know you completed the encounter, we've generated a tree, and you'd go through and you'd look, okay, does my tree have valuable things? Maybe Elemental Equilibrium is a valuable buy. Maybe somebody will want this. It isn't a very common mod to get. There might be builds that this is like S tier, maybe. Depends on the keystone. That is something that you put it in a sell tab, maybe it sells, maybe it doesn't. Other stuff like sells for an Igneous Geode, this I don't think is worth the time to charge up to sell, but maybe if Igneous Geodes get more valuable on the market, more than 10C, it'll be worth the time to charge this bow a couple more times just to sell it for Igneous Geode. The other things on here don't seem particularly cool, but maybe there's a build that wants Culling Strike as an extra link, because that is technically like 11% more damage, and if you get that on your 6th link, 11% more damage is 11% more damage. So maybe this has potential for somebody who wants to try to forge over Culling Strike. Most likely, I think there's better mods in the tier 4 category or column, so I don't think this will really sell for much. Most likely, I'm just going to vendor it myself. But each time you go on a map, you get to re-roll that chance and re-roll the chance at hitting something big or something valuable to something else, to somebody else. If you're not sure if it's valuable or not, really what I would do is I'd make a tab and I'd say like make it a 50C dump tab. Just chuck everything in here and see what sells if you're not sure if it's valuable or not. Next up, let's go ahead and showcase you guys what it looks like to do one of these combines with the wands we have prepped. Whenever you do these arenas, they have very difficult mods. The monsters are hard. Unless you have a crazy build, I wouldn't really recommend farming it. You probably just want to run through it all the way to the end because the monsters take forever to spawn. I think GGG needed to implement this a little bit better so that way you actually have to fight through the challenge in order to get to the craft at the end. Right now you can kind of just bypass it even if you're doing this really difficult map with all these crazy mods. The endgame encounter isn't really an endgame encounter because you're recommended as a player. The smart thing to do is just sprint through to the end, even though that's cheesing the mechanic. It's what you probably should do. So at the top, the item on the top always gets melted down. The item on the bottom always gets the new passive tree. So I want to keep this item on the bottom because it's the one I'm trying to craft on. And it's not guaranteed I get these, but it's more likely because I have them spec'd. So I'm going to go ahead and click the forge option. And there also is a small chance you get a mutation. Something where the item goes down a level, like you might retain the mod, but it might go down a tier. Or even something like you might get a new fancy mod that you didn't have before. So we got socketed gems and 22% more cast speed. That's exactly what we wanted. Those two mods make me a weapon that's basically similar to the power weapon of this one here. Now this one has a bit lower cast speed, but it has a socketed fizzed lightning. I'm probably still going to use this weapon because I want that fizzed lightning, But if you were going to make the weapon for the build, ultimately the first wand I had initially was these two mods, and it worked great. So that'll give you an idea of your odds are pretty decent, but they're not guaranteed. I got a little bit lucky hitting that, I think, because last night I was doing some gambling with the Forge where I was trying to transfer over Cell's unique Siege Axe, aka the item that would sell for Soul Taker, and I lost it every single time when I did the splits, and we lost a bunch of money. Now, for the real gamble, we're going to do this one here, and we're going to try to put the 34 flat ES from this shield onto my Steel Kite shield, because ideally I want this on the Emperor's Vigilance base while retaining the explicit defense modifiers. If I get really, really lucky, I might have the tier upgraded to 40 flat ES, and all of a sudden I have a base that's extremely valuable to chance into Emperor's Vigilance, because it would be like 900 ES. That being said, keep in mind, one of the advantages of getting a very valuable base is you can always split it and then have two bases, aka if I make the perfect base for Emperor's Vigilance, do not chance it. Split it first, and you have two of those bases. You can now sell one and fund your character's other gear slots while making the other one for your build yourself. So, if I want the Steel Kite shield as the base, I'm going to put that on the bottom, and I'll put this one at the top. It's going to be RNG. I'm trying to get the ES down here, along with the explicit defense modifiers. We'll see what happens. It's not like, I don't know, I'm not holding out my hopes. It's a 50-50 between the defense armor mod and the ES mod. What do we get? We get the ES mod. Now, did we keep the explicit defense? We did. Okay, so now we have actually a pretty good base. I think this base would hit roughly around 800 ES on Emperor's Vigilance. That's actually very, very good for us. This is a scenario where you start to consider maybe that's a base that's good enough to chance. I don't know if it's good enough to chance. It depends if you want to spend thousands and thousands of clicks chance ordering it. Maybe this is one of those bases where you think, I might try to combine it with something else and go for an even higher outcome. Maybe I try to get the 60% defense mod on here as well, which would be, again, a very RNG thing to go for. Say you could get the 60% defense modifier on here. Maybe you had the defense modifier roll over here, and then all of a sudden, you can only get one of the others. Like, it ends up being quite RNG, whether or not you can get the thing you actually want, but it's technically possible. So hopefully that gives you guys a good look at the Crucible mechanic, how you can craft your items, how you can try to seek out bases for your own build. Say there's a specific base item that you want to upgrade into a specific unique. That's the base item, so you should highlight it on your filter and start throwing them in the Crucible. So I made this video just to give a quick breakdown of all the basics I know for Crucible that maybe will help you in the league itself. As always, take care, Exiles, and peace out.